Hello, folks, and welcome back. We've taken a tour of the greater Rome area. Now let's move to the city of Rome and look at some of the earliest remains from, well, the earliest period of Rome, and talk about some of the foundational myths connected with them, too. So if you were growing up in Rome, these would have been some of the most sacred sites in your city. They would have been something that your parents told you about when they were telling you what it meant to be Roman, and these would have been places that symbolized the roots of your cultural heritage. Yeah, no, I think that's all we need to say here. But I'm going to start with yet another map, that shows all of the various people groups who lived around the city of Rome. So I'm going to use my red marker here to show you, here's the city of Rome on the Tiber. And next to it are all these other city-states in the region. So a city-state, if you're not familiar, is a city that's also a sovereign nation. So this would be like if Baltimore declared its independence, or like there wasn't a United States and Baltimore was just Baltimore. There was no state of Maryland, there was no United States. Baltimore City was self-governing and occasionally went to war with Pittsburgh over territory. That's a city-state. And all of these other people groups in the areas are in their own little city-states. And there are little colored dots by the city-states that show you the ethno-linguistic groups that these city-states represent. You'll also notice there are these other names just kind of floating out in the countryside, like the Volsci and the Sabini. So those are the larger people groups to which these city-states belong. So they're not necessarily a political unity, but they are a cultural unity. And this is pretty typical of the Italian peninsula. We think some of this is an artifact of herding behaviors, where people would, on a seasonal basis, bring their herds down from the mountains to the lowlands to graze and then back up the mountains at other times of the year. And that their seasonal encampments and their market towns eventually became permanent settlements that people would travel back to and forth, and that groups would naturally glom around shared language and religious beliefs and so on. Rome does seem to be one of these cities. There were noble families that are associated with the very earliest days of the city of Rome that seem to have co-founded the city, we think. We're going to have a lot of sketchy speculation in this lecture because we don't have a ton of reliable written information for various reasons. Rome's library and archives were burned in the year 387, so later historians kind of pieced back together the early history of Rome, which came from a combination of urban legends, like literally urban legends, and mythical beliefs. There's a lot of slippage between mythology and history in this early stage. But this is where archaeology comes to the rescue. Archaeology can give us more information. There are some inscriptions involved too, and writing always helps. Suffice to say, it's complicated. One of the complications is that Romans are just one of several Latin-speaking city-states, but they're on the border between Etruscan territory and Latin territory. Romans speak a language called Latin, which is why you take Latin, not Roman. And they're one of many. You can see other Latin groups here with the little pink dots. The Etruscans, interestingly, are an immigrant population that settled and intermarried with local Italians. And this is echoed a little bit in Rome's foundation stories, too. Modern genetic analysis of Etruscan remains does hold up the idea that they came from the Near East, perhaps the modern-day Levant or maybe even Mesopotamia and settled at some point in Italy. That it makes sense. It tracks. It also agrees with what Herodotus said. So take that, Herodotus haters. At any rate, the Latins do seem to have a longer history in the Italian peninsula. Further down, you have the Volsci, the Sabines, the Samnites, and all of these are independent peoples with a slightly different linguistic group. Um, Latin Sabine, it does seem to be related, but again, there's not a lot of surviving non-Latin language, so tracing this gets technical and very hypothetical. Etruscan was a different language. I don't know entirely. They used a different alphabet than Latin does, for instance. Um, Although even then, we do see some Latin inscriptions that seem to be using the Etruscan alphabet, so it's complicated. The short version is that even if you're just looking at Italy, this is a very diverse region with a lot of different language groups, a lot of different power bases, and the Romans, when they start out, are a border town of very little importance. Their main claim to fame is they're on the Tiber, so that's good for trade. They're between the Etruscans and the Latins, so they're kind of at a nice crossroad, but they're in this swampy, nasty marshland, and they don't have very much territory to their name, and they won't have a lot of territory until much later in their history. Early Roman history is very local history. Let us begin in the 9th to 8th centuries BCE. This is also called the Iron Age sometimes. It comes after the Bronze Age. It's a bit of an old-timey way of discussing this period, but hey, let's go with it. So this is a period that begins with breakdown and decentralization in the wake of multicultural collapse in the Eastern Mediterranean. In the Western Mediterranean, however, it's a happening time. Phoenician settlers are founding a lot of different city-states around the region, including a lot of city-states in Sicily and the very tiptoe of Italy. Sardinia is also a Phoenician heartland, as is Carthage. Carthage is founded in this period. Rome and Carthage seem to spring up at about the same time. In many ways, they're kind of like twins. I'm not sure which twin is the evil twin. That's a question for wiser people. Also, evil twins aren't a thing, but they're fun. At any rate, we have a lot of larger settlements springing up at this period. In the wake of the Bronze Age collapse, there's a bit of a retrenchment, but in the Western Mediterranean, we see some bouncing back. And we see these nuclei of settled communities with permanent buildings starting to form and become more complicated and also more connected with these trade routes that are recovering after Bronze Age collapse. So one of the repercussions of this is that the Phoenician alphabet is brought to the Western Mediterranean. This forms the basis of the alphabet that eventually gets used by Latin, which is the alphabet we still use today. We've added a couple letters, but essentially we're still doing it this way. Couple centuries later, so now we're in the 7th to 6th centuries BCE. So this is, for fans of Greek history, this is the century before the Greco-Persian Wars. Aren't a lot of big recognizable milestones here. So this is the period during which the Latin speakers are dominant in Latium, and there are confederations forming amongst city-states. So I mentioned there isn't like a ton of political unity, but there is a lot of alliance between members of the same language groups. And the Latins particularly are doing this in response to Etruscans. The Apennines form a nice kind of firewall at their back, but along the Tiber River border, Latins and Etruscans are eyeing each other with increasing suspicion. while Greek colonists, so Greek speakers from the Greek mainland and other places too, mostly Ionia, which is the coast of modern day Turkey. So folks from the Ionian Sea who speak Greek are coming in large numbers to the south of Italy and also to Sicily. The name for this region of southern Italy given to it by Romans is Magna Graecia, which is Latin for Big Greece or Great Greece. Big Greece is not actually in Greek. Big fat Greece is in Italy, which tells you a lot about what Greek means in the ancient Mediterranean. Also, we tend to assume that Greek means people from Greece, of course. No, most speakers of Greek in the Mediterranean didn't live in mainland Greece. A lot of them lived in Turkey, North Africa, Egypt, even before the Ptolemies. A lot of Greek speakers in Egypt, the coast of North Africa too, although not so much because the Phoenicians get there first, but because the Phoenicians are in Spain and the south of what's now France, Greek colonists, a little bit late to the game, go for the next best real estate, which is southern Italy. So lots and lots of Greek speakers, including Greeks you've heard of. Pythagoras, Triangle Dude, he settled in southern Italy. So yeah, when we mean Greek, or when we mean Greeks in the ancient world, we're often talking about people living on the continent of Africa or people living in Italy. And to Greek speakers, their definition for what Greek meant was, do you speak Greek? Do you worship Greek gods? Do you say you're Greek? You're Greek. So when I'm making such a big deal about this because you'll often hear people saying a couple of things. First, Macedonians aren't real Greeks. Yes, they are. Athenians were very snobby about them, but they speak Greek, they worship Greek gods, they're Greek. The next thing you'll hear is that, oh, Macedonians are Greek, they're not African. But when we're talking about the Ptolemies in particular, they'd spent generations living in northern Egypt, and not all of the heirs were the children of marriages between brothers and sisters. Cleopatra VII, for instance, was not the child of Ptolemy's official wife. She was the child of a concubine who was an Egyptian priestess. So, even if you are brown, if you speak Greek and you worship Greek gods, you still count as Greek because identity works a little differently in the ancient world. Their ideas of what race is and what ethnicity is are different from our ideas of what race and ethnicity are. They still have them, they still have prejudice, they're super problematic stuff. It's just our rules are different, and the things that we pay attention to when we try to peg people in these categories are very different. Side note, for ancient people, skin color in art is how they showed gender differences. The more feminine, the paler. The more masculine, the tanner. And as, sometimes when you're looking at Greek and Roman art, you'll be like, to our eyes, it looks like the men and the women are from completely different ethnic groups. Nah, that's just how artists are exaggerating gender differences. So all of this I'm saying because this is one of the major misunderstandings folks have about the ancient Mediterranean. None of this is controversial. All of this is mainstream scholarship supported by years of work that began in the 70s. And all of it has been confirmed by paleogenetic studies of ancient peoples' remains. So there were Black Greeks, there were Black Romans, and most people in the ancient Mediterranean were just kind of medium brown. So what would have been really weird to ancient Romans is if you looked a little too pale, they'd be like, what are you, Celtic? You barbarian? So Hollywood casting needs to rethink itself, is what I'm saying here. Okay, so off of that Very important tangent, but it's still a tangent to what we're talking about here. So as I mentioned, the Etruscans are in Etruria to the north, the Greeks in the far, far south, Latins in Latium. You'll notice the Romans still aren't on the map other than a dot, because they're not that important yet. They're barely getting started. About the Etruscans, they were the wealthiest people group in Italy. And if you lived in the 5th century BCE, you would likely think that if anybody was destined to become the head of a gigantic empire spanning the Mediterranean, it would be the Etruscans. The Etruscans were closely tied in with trade routes all across the Mediterranean. They were fabulously wealthy, so wealthy that there was an entire sector of the Greek pottery market that was geared specifically for Etruscan party wear, because Etruscans had super specific tastes. They liked a lot of naked people doing a lot of naughty things, which made mainland Greek people think that Etruscans were super slutty. Like I said, ancient people had problematic racist ideas. They were just different. Um, More about that in a minute. But at any rate, their cities in this period were planned. We can tell because they're grids, there seemed to be zoning, including zoning for the dead. They often built on a hillside facing another hillside across a river valley, and you'd have your dead on the one side and you're living on the other side. In fact, that feels kind of Egyptian in a way. And that's not out of place with the Etruscans. They're very well connected and quite powerful, both because of trade, but also their military. Their military used cutting-edge tactics developed in the Eastern Mediterranean, including phalanx tactics, and they were equipped with the very best weapons and armor, better even than folks in mainland Greece during this period. This is about the time of the Greco-Persian Wars, because of their access to iron. So part of why the Iron Age starts a little earlier in the Western Mediterranean is, well, they're closer to the iron, and Etruscans could afford a lot of that. Now, they were very literate and a complex society with a lot of um, cultural investment in the arts and poetry and the sciences, in religious research, in divination and magical beliefs. I mean, you name it, they had stuff relevant to it. But we're really hampered in figuring out what that all was, because very little of their written remains survive. Most of it are short inscriptions, and those are likely a lot of names. To give you an idea of what I mean by short inscriptions, here's one of the examples down here. Yeah, we don't know. And the last speaker of Etruscan, the last person who could read Etruscan, was the Emperor Claudius, who died in the 50s CE. So it's been 2,000 years since somebody's been able to read Etruscan. Where did all the Etruscan science go, you may ask? It was translated into Latin, and it ends up in the Roman tradition. So we've got a good idea of the general outlines of all of this stuff, and likely the Etruscans are responsible for a lot of features we see in Roman religion, especially the divination stuff in Roman religion. So reading entrails, watching the sky for signs from the gods, including precision bird watching. Bird watching was serious business in Rome, and there was this whole body of literature about how to interpret the will of the gods through bird behavior. So if you like bird watching, you would have done really well in ancient Rome. Now, we do have good archaeological remains of Etruscan art, especially funerary art, because of these city of the dead situations that we have in Etruscan cities. And this is just one such example of the kinds of things we find in Etruscan tombs. This is a sarcophagus. So this is the container for human remains, and it held were we think, the going theory is that this is a husband and wife burial. And what's interesting here is that the husband and the wife are both reclining on a banquet couch together. And this is probably some of the context that informs mainland Greek ideas about slutty Etruscans, because in mainland Greece, especially Athens, you didn't invite your wife to lay down at a couch party. That was like, super inappropriate. You'd invite sex workers, you'd invite musicians, but you wouldn't like have your wife on the couch with you. Etruscans? Not so much. Etruscan women do seem to have enjoyed a remarkable degree of gender equality, and Herodotus bears that out as well. And this likely informs the better situation for women's rights in Rome compared to other places in the Mediterranean. And it's not a feminist paradise in Rome by any means, but like it's better than Athens. I was about to say Gilead is probably better than Athens, but no, actually, that's worse. It's not quite that bad, but it's bad. One other note about gender in Etruria. There was a tomb found, and I can't remember the city-state off the top of my head, but when they first uncovered the bodies, they assumed that the figure with the jewelry in the corner of the tomb was a female skeleton, and that the body buried with armor and weapons was a male skeleton. But closer examination of the skeleton showed that the person with the jewelry had anatomy more typical with a male-bodied person, and the person with the armor had a body more typical of a female-bodied person. Now, what this means, we don't know, because what little inscriptions there are we can't read. Is this like a trans couple, or is this a woman who was in the military and her wife liked jewelry? Like, we're not sure what exactly the situation is. But it's an interesting clue about what it might have been to be Etruscan. And yeah, that's kind of cool. I wish we knew more about this. I wish I knew more about this. So here's another scene from a tomb, and this is pretty typical of Etruscan tombs. They like to show themselves partying in their tomb scenes. And here you can see the Etruscans doing the skin tone equals gender thing. So this is a male figure. The naked male figure is either a younger person doing banquet service, or it might be an enslaved person, but the figure looks about as tall as the rest of the folks, so probably this is a freeborn person, but again, it's unclear. So there's another dude, and then here are women looking very pale, because that's how we show gender. And then up here we have leopards, which are not native to Italy, by the way. Leopards you have to bring from somewhere else. So this is showing their cosmopolitan street cred. And these are some very expensive colors. The blue in particular, this really intense blue, was compounded from crushed lapis lazuli stones imported from Egypt. So this is fancy. There's some conspicuous consumption going on in here. And this is how the Etruscans want you to remember them, not as a military force to be reckoned with, or well, maybe there's a little political play or subtext. But here, for eternity, they're hanging out in greenery with wealth, enjoying a fantastic meal with their friends, and likely spouses. Why spouses? When people who are not your spouse, but a sex worker or a woman who's not of a citizen class that you invite to your banquet, sometimes you'll hear that translated as courtesan. We should be cautious with that. They're shown in a more sexualized posture. They're not wearing their overgarment draped so tightly around them. Their undertunics don't cover as much. Often they're like naked or in the process of getting naked. Um, these women also have their hair bound up in garlands, just like the men, which suggests equality and also a ritual significance to this too. Garlands on the head were part of party and religious culture. You weren't supposed to wear them outdoors, and you weren't supposed to wear them during the daytime. We know about some Romans who got sued for going outside wearing their garland in daylight, which is kind of hilarious to me. At any rate, what we're likely looking at is some dudes partying with their wives. And this is why I think mainland Athenians and Corinthians were pearl clutching at the Etruscans. How dare they invite their wives to a party? So, one last bit of Etruscan remains. This is a bulla. A bulla is a kind of necklace that Romans also wore. So this does seem to be something that Romans took directly from their Etruscan connections and roots. Romans believed that some of their ancestors were Etruscan, so this tracks. This one's made out of gold. They could be made out of a lot of things. Originally, at least according to legend, these were made from a bull's testicles. So when you castrated your male livestock, you would keep the testicles that you had removed, dried them, and you would put them around the necks of your prepubescent children as a way of protecting them from the evil eye and from any like bad vibes that might be coming at them. You had to do this because you're living in a freaking malarial basin, and that's not great for your child mortality. Also, there are no vaccines, and vaccines save lives. Vaccinate your children. So, if you were wondering what a bull's testicle is shaped like, this is what a bull's testicle is shaped like. They're kind of pointy on the bottom, and there's usually like a little tuft of fur there. So upper class Etruscan children and eventually Roman children would wear this kind of necklace made out of metals. So you don't need a literal bull's testicle to wear around your child's neck. But you would wear this until you came of age. And if you were a boy, you would have a ceremony where you put on your grown-up toga and then you dedicate this to the gods who saw you through childhood. It's a little bit like the Roman version of a bar mitzvah. So, yay, that's Etruscans. This one is particularly extra because it's got like multiple bull's testicles. You got one here, and this thing in the middle is meant to be a bull's testicle too. The Roman version looks more like the round thing, although sometimes you do see them in that like acorn shape. Ancient people do things different. So now on to Iron Age Rome. We do have some remains from this very earliest period of Rome, and this is a reconstruction of what we think Iron Age Rome looked like. These are straw-thatched huts made out of wattle and daub. So you use twigs to weave a wicker base around posts, and then you cover it with a combination of mud and straw. Sometimes dung is mixed in there too, although that's more of a Northern European thing. Here it's silty mud clay. This is a great way to build a house. We're going back to this. Google cob houses if you want to see some really glorious Hobbit-esque architecture. This is great sustainable building material. It insulates, it's cool in the summer, it's warm in the winter. Wonderful choice for all of your small house needs. Why do we know that early Romans lived in these, you may ask? Well, there were a couple of huts that were preserved as kind of like theme parks commemorating one of the founding figures of Rome, or the founding figure of Rome, really. This dude named Romulus. His name means Mr. Rome. we have a lot of question marks around the veracity of this story. But if you're an ancient Roman, this is what you're told. Our city was founded by a dude named Mr. Rome, and he lived in a hut. And then you, as a little Roman, could go see Romulus's hut because it was kept up and restored, and people would fix it on the regular. Except there's one on the Palatine and one on the Capitoline. There were dueling Romulus's huts, and people argued about which hut was the legit hut, which just pleases me to no end. So this was the Roman answer to colonial Williamsburg. One of the things you could do on your, I don't know, little baby Roman field trip is go sit in Romulus's hut and feel what it was like to be your ancestor. I find that absolutely charming. So here's how we figured out what this looks like. The entire hut did not survive the 2000-ish years since it was last maintained. People stopped keeping this as a theme park when people stopped worshipping Romulus as a founder deity. So as Rome became a Christian city, you kind of don't preserve the hut memorial to Romulus, do you? However, the foundations were really well preserved and they were excavated. Here's a picture of that excavation. So this is very small. Like, you could maybe get 4 Dr. Jones Lewises in here if we were all laying down on the floor, sitting in a really small hut. You only stay in here when you're sleeping and like not out watching the cows or whatever. This central hole here is for the central post, and all of these large holes around the edge are for the posts around which the wicker is woven. And then the roof ribs would have been attached like so. This is a reconstruction. So how do we know what the outside looked like if all we got are the post holes? Well, post holes can tell you a lot, but in the early days of Rome and other Latin adjacent areas, when you were buried, your body was cremated. Your relatives would pick up the little fragments of your bones left over from the cremation, and then they would put you in a little mini model house, and that would be your funeral urn. And they survive. Here's one of them. This is a funerary urn, including a removable door. These threads have been added as part of the reconstruction when archaeologists found it and put it back together. But this door is separate because, it's found together with the find, so you could have opened and closed it. Romans had religious observances where they would remember their ancestral dead and give them offerings, so likely this movable door was there in part to honor the spirits of the ancestors. We know where the threads go because the holes were left. So likely these huts had a rawhide flap as their door, some kind of like overhead hang. And then you can see the ribs on the outside of the thatch modeled into the terracotta on the sides. You use this to hold down the straw on the thatch so it doesn't blow away in a strong wind. And then we know where the hole is for smoke to come out of the cook fire because it's on the funeral urn. This gives us all the information we need to figure out what this hut looked like, which is pretty darn spiffy if I do say so myself. Today, you can still go and visit Romulus's hut, which, if everything goes well and the vaccine works and COVID doesn't come back and the world doesn't catch on fire again, the Ancient Studies Department will be taking a trip to Italy soonish. So keep an eye out for that. Even if you're not a major, you're welcome to come. We get a good price, and you get to go with your Ancient Studies professors who will tell you more than you ever wanted to know about the stuff you're looking at. So this is the site today, where you can still look in and see the foundations of the hut of Romulus. So you, like an ancient Roman kid, can go and experience the ancestor's house. Which brings us to early Rome. As I mentioned, early Rome is a city-state, and what we start seeing in the 8th to 7th centuries are the first remains of an urban core, including some early improvements to help offset the swampiness, and our first permanent buildings with stone foundations that stick around a bit. So this is post-Hut Rome. These remains include public areas, including temples, and that's partly why we still have them. Some of them were very sacred and preserved by ancient people well enough that their remains were findable and recognizable when the Forum was re-excavated in the 1930s. We see a pattern also of families with more money than Hut money building large urban homes. We think for maybe not year-round dwelling. We still think that, as in later periods, people were going off to their country estates when Rome was super swampy and then coming back to live there for part of the year. But elite families are now spending money on making those part-time homes really, really nice because Rome's finally getting underway enough that it's worth their time. This is also when we begin to see written texts. At this point, people are using the Greek script to write in very early versions of Latin, and these are very short inscriptions. We can figure them out because we know how Latin works, and we can use linguistics wizardry to figure out what ye old Latin looks like and what words are what. So yay. So we've got the beginnings of an urbanized, stratified, complicated society. What are these early monuments? I'm going to take you on a bit-by-bit tour. Now, this map is a composite map showing all of the buildings that were ever in Rome during the ancient period, which is almost 1,000 years worth of habitation. From the traditional date of the founding of Rome is 753 BCE, which is in the 8th century. I'm fine, that works. And this map ends at about the mid 100 CE. Is this? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. There's another map that ends at Constantine, but I don't think this one goes that far quite. So there's a lot of later stuff here. So now I'm just going to tell you what the oldest stuff in this map is. So just to orient you, this is the slope going up the Capitoline Hill that I'm outlining in red here. The Palatine Hill is on the other side of all of this. So we're going to be looking at the black stone, or the lapis niger, which, well, more about the black stone in a minute. Then let me find, here is the lacus curtius, right down here. And then, so we're not quite at the comitium yet. And is the Temple of Vesta in this view? No, I don't think so. Okay, so these are the earlier things we find. Oh, how could I forget? There is also, so there's this kind of line running underneath. That is the course of the Cloaca Maxima. This is a large storm sewer that was built underneath the ground level of the Forum to drain away this excess swamp water and general blurk that would build up in the Forum. So some of the earliest stuff in the Forum is all about engineering and monuments celebrating engineering. You know, Romans are super duper problematic, but one of the things I enjoy with unmitigated and unvarnished glee is Roman engineers, because gosh darn it, they're so good at stuff. And I love people who plan. Full disclosure, Mr. Spouse is an engineer. I love them. Delightful people. First stop on our tour is the lapis niger. This is Latin for black stone, so you can just call it the black stone, that's fine. But you'll see the Latin sometimes too. Quick note about the color word here. This isn't the word that Romans use for people's skin tone. This is the word for the kind of black that midnight is. This isn't like the color of people with lots and lots of melanin. For that, they'd use ater or fuscus or something. So a different word. Modern people went with this and took it to a super duper toxic place. At any rate, this particular remain is the oldest monument that survives in Rome, and for Romans, they believed this was the oldest monument in Rome, so this is probably the oldest monument in Rome. And here's what it looks like. So it had to be reconstructed, and this is a picture that lets you see the writing really well. This is very old archaic Latin using Greek letters, and also I think it's a kind of writing where instead of going always left to right, they'll go left to right, then right to left. They'll like go in an S shape back and forth. So that is a really old school way of writing things in the ancient Mediterranean. Here's what it looks like in place. And you will notice it looks like it's in a basement. That's because it's in a basement. This was underneath a temple in the later Roman Forum. Back in the day, this would have been at ground level, but because the Roman Forum keeps getting flooded and then silt deposits and then the ground level rises, different stages of construction in the Forum are at different ground levels, which made excavating it super duper fun. So this is what the street level looks like today, and this has already been excavated down a bit. So here's where you walk. This is the remains of the temple that used to be over top of this site, and then you can kind of look down in this hole, and then you can get a view of the black stone. This was thought to be something erected by Romulus. Ancient Romans thought that this was the boundary stone of original Rome. The text reconstructed were not 100% sure on what it says, but we can recognize some of the words, one of which is the word rex, which in Latin, later Latin, it means king, but king doesn't mean exactly for the Romans what you may think of as a king. It's got more of a religious connotation, and this is not to say that kingship isn't associated with religion, and there's a reason why the Queen of England is also the head of the Church of England, so it's not completely different. But what a rex seems to have been in charge of was some judicial activity, so settling disputes, hearing cases, interpreting the will of the gods, and acting as an intermediary between the community and the divine. It comes from a root that means to direct or to pilot. So the same word rego regere, which is the verb of rex, is used for steering a ship, for steering a chariot, driving a car. So if we still use it in English for somebody who leads a parish, like a rector is somebody who, or director, that's even better. So a director leads things all the way through, like a play or something. This stone had an important ritual significance to later Romans. When you swore your most sacred oath as a Roman citizen, you'd swear on the black stone. And this was meant to be an unbreakable oath, super duper serious. If you lie on the black stone, that's like really bad. If you're Roman, don't do that. Next in our tour of the primitive forum is the Lacus Curtius, which is an engineering monument. So of course I'm getting super duper excited about this. I'm going to talk about the archaeology first, and then I'll talk about some of the stories Romans told each other about what the heck this thing is. This is at the lowest level in the Roman Forum. This is an area that tends to collect a lot of water, and it's It also seems to be one of the last paved areas in the core of the original Roman Forum. It also seems to be the site of some very early efforts to create good drainage. So the name Lacus Curtius means the Lake of Curtius. The word lacus gives us the word lake in English. And also, like, dark depressions on the moon are also a lacus, is one of them, laci, plural. So it means the Lake of Curtius. So Romans did agree that there was a puddle of some kind there. But here's where it gets a little sketchy. So some Romans thought that this was a place where there had been a lightning strike, so there was a shrine set up to honor the gods. That's on the soberer end of stories about this. Another story about this is that this was a sacred lake that lost its water eventually, but became a shrine. Okay, but let's get to the super dramatic one. So this is the one in Livy. According to Livy, the Lacus Curtius was this chasm that opened up in the Forum, and it was a horrible omen. And the Romans asked the gods, like, what can we do to solve this horrible thing? And the oracle said to them, you need to throw the thing that you value most into the chasm, or else. I'm not sure, or else what. So the Romans were like, okay, what do we value most? Like gold, silver, jewels, what? And in typical Roman fashion, they sat around arguing about it for a while until this one Roman dude, a guy named Marcus Curtius, was like, oh my gosh, you idiots. So he put on his armor, he got on his horse, and then he dove into the chasm, which is what is going on in this art that was excavated near the Lacus Curtius. So you can see there's this wetland area. There are these kind of reedy plants growing up in it. There's a chasm, and then there's this dude on a horse riding in a downward direction into it. That's Marcus Curtius. So he rides into the chasm, and the gods are pleased. The chasm closes up. And the moral of the story is the most valuable thing to the Roman people isn't your wealth, it isn't your power, it's the armed strength of your young men. If you were a little Roman growing up and hearing this story, this gives you a specific message about what it means to be Roman. And it's one that rearticulates and emphasizes a focus on patriotic duty in the form of military service, and also a willingness to sacrifice your young life in the defense of the state, yes, but also in the offensive defense of the state. Romans took a stance on defending their borders that was very proactive, which is how you end up gobbling up large amounts of Mediterranean real estate. But what this also meant, that particularly if you were a male-bodied person in ancient Rome, the expectation was that if you're going to meet the gendered expectations your society had of you, you needed to take an interest in military service. And that's something that would feel very different if you were someone with a disability, if you didn't necessarily want to be a soldier with your life, if you were living in a period where military service meant signing up for 20 plus years of service with the legions, which is a long freaking time to go off and serve, even today, let alone before modern medicine when you're dying young a lot. That kind of expectation and that sort of pressure is going to inform a lot of the choices that we see our ancient Roman friends making over the course of our readings and course material. And it's going to be something that Roman men in particular, but Romans in general, are constantly reconsidering and coping with and thinking about, because ancient people are still people. just like you and me, they feel inadequate, they feel insecure, they worry about being good enough. They're asked to do things for their family and their people that they wouldn't ordinarily do, that are scary, that are difficult. And they have differing opinions about what is ethical. There was an active Roman peace movement, also an ancient Roman environmentalist movement, which is, as much as I pick on Romans for supporting problematic agendas, I think it's okay to do that because actual Romans were pushing back. So everywhere we see Romans making decisions, and I'm not saying that serving in the military is a bad decision. Like, I'm so not saying that. I have relatives who are veterans, including like people I absolutely love and respect. So not saying that. What I am saying is that what your culture says a good person who fits your identity parameters should do is often contradictory and difficult and something that you are going to struggle with. Every one of you, I'm sure, has had that feeling about the culture you were born into. I know I have. And these are tensions we're constantly negotiating. Romans, too. They had a lot of social expectations put on them that they had to sit with and wrestle with and think about a lot. And not all of them react in the same way to these expectations. And that's where I find humanity and recognition in the ancient world, in that struggle, in that tension, in that uncertainty about how to make a good and ethical decision for us and for our families and our society. And that makes me feel less lonely. So that's my take on it. Okay, so here is Rome in 753 BC, at least a pretty darn good guess as to where it was. The heavy black line that you see here around the Capitoline and Palatine hills rather, is the alleged site of the original walls of Rome. Sometimes you'll hear it called the Palmarium. I'm not going to ask you to learn that word. The Capitoline and Palatine were felt to be the original foundational heartland. That's where a lot of the important sacred buildings are. The rest of this geography should be pretty familiar to you. Don't pay as much attention to the place labels on this map are a little weird, but you can see what you need to see. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that on this area, so this is labeled Campus Martius, which means the field of Mars. So Mars is the Roman god of war. He's one of the founding deities of the state. Campus means a field in Latin, and that's why we talk about a college campus. The campus is the field on which the college is built. Hence. But also, we call a college campus because of this particular field. The field of Mars during this period still hadn't been drained. It had a lake, it was marshy, it's a flat land, but that's why nobody builds buildings on it. It's a flat land that isn't adjacent to the main hills, so it doesn't get made into a marketplace. It's just this open area. And even as Rome becomes more urban, this place is kept mostly clear for whenever large numbers of Romans need to get together. And that tends to happen when young Romans are being trained for war. So the citizen army used to mass and train on this field. This is also where Romans went to vote as a citizen body. So they'd vote for elected representatives, they'd vote for resolutions, decisions on whether or not to go to war, who gets to be in charge of the war, stuff like that. You'd go to the field of Mars to do that. So this is another really important bit of urban real estate that we'll see showing up, especially when we talk about Roman government. Next, we have yet another it's landmark, that's the word I'm looking for, in downtown Rome. This is yet another monument and engineering feat memorial thing. This is the Cloaca Maxima. Cloaca is the Latin word for a storm sewer, or just a sewer. This is a large underground drainage system that's put in the lowest point of the city of Rome, that is underneath the Roman Forum. And this is one of the first things they do in the city of Rome as a permanent engineering feature. So they dug underneath the ground level of the Roman Forum and then built this stone-lined drainage pipe that leads right into the River Tiber. So this isn't anything that would match modern code, but it is an improvement over letting the animal sewage from the meat market, which is also happening in the Roman Forum, from like sitting in the streets. At least theoretically, rain and river runoff will go into the drainage system here and would be funneled out right to the Tiber. So this is the earliest attempt to flush all of these sewage and dirt and muck and standing water from Rome. This is an important moment in urban planning and an important moment in medical history. This is one of the earliest attempts to control malaria using urban planning and engineering feats, including the rounded arches that are used to hold up the vaults under the pressure coming from above ground as more and more temples are being built on this area. So, oh my gosh, right? This is super duper cool. Yay, or at least I think it's cool. The course of the Cloaca Maxima you can see on this map. Let me find where I put it. Ah, yes, here it is. I kind of have it outlined in red. So it's this line going here out through the cattle market and down to the River Tiber. What we're looking at in this picture is the modern outflow of the Cloaca Maxima. It's not this big arch here. That's part of the bridge over top of the outlet. This is the River Tiber. You can see the water here. And then there's this fence. So below the modern level of the river, this is so old that the modern River Tiber is higher than the Cloaca Maxima. But there's a little tiny arch inside of here with the outlet. The Cloaca Maxima still functions. It's still got water in it. It still acts as drainage for the city of Rome. Awesome! The Cloaca Maxima isn't just the storm sewer, though. It's also a religious site, and it has its own goddess in charge of it. And this is my favorite part. So, one note about cloaca. You might be familiar with it from biology. If you're not, a cloaca is an anatomical feature that birds have, also theropods. In fact, somebody found a Chinese fossil showing a theropod cloaca, or rather the cloacal vent on a theropod. So we know that dinosaurs had these too. Dinosaurs! This is so cool. 7-year-old me is also very happy about this factoid. Right, so cloaca is a common duct that birds use to excrete both urine and feces. They excrete both in this kind of sludgy all-in-one fluid, which is why bird poop is the way it is. Again, kind of a two-part splat. I mean, you know bird poop. I shouldn't describe bird poop in loving detail, but yeah. The reason it's all mixed together is it's coming out of the same vent, and that's also where birds lay eggs. So birds lay eggs through the same hole that they poop and pee. And that's a cloaca. It's an all-in-one. It's a vagina, anus, urethra. And honestly, wouldn't that save time? It wouldn't actually. That sounds like a really good way to get a UTI. But birds seem to do okay with it, I guess. But anyway, that's one way to remember this, or help yourself in biology, whichever is more useful to you. And the goddess of the sewer is Venus, who you may also know as Aphrodite. She is the goddess of sexual attraction, also reproduction, but mostly she and her son a little bit is the goddess who has the power to make people get lusty feelings for each other. Now, not everybody is subject to the power of Venus. In classical mythology, there are certain gods who are immune. all of the ones I can think of are female. There's Hestia, Artemis, and Athena, who are the asexual triad, as it were. But Zeus, not immune. Now, all of this sounds kind of like an excuse Zeus uses to explain his nonsense. More about Zeus's nonsense coming up. But at any rate, so Venus is the goddess in charge of the gutter, and isn't that just the most perfect thing you ever heard of? I love that so much. So here's what's left of the shrine of Venus Cloacina. Like, not only was she the patron goddess, but she had her own shrine. The foundations survive, and they're in a circular configuration. And it's unusual to find a temple of Venus that's circular. Normally, that's associated with goddesses like Vesta, who's a goddess of the hearth, and hearths are circular, so the temple is circular. Or hero gods sometimes. It's complicated. But at any rate, circular shrine, so that's kind of cool. And we know what the shrine used to look like because this is a Roman coin with a picture of the shrine. Now, this isn't the goddess Venus. This is another god, the god Concordia. Concordia is the goddess of getting along. God damn it. She's the goddess of don't make me come back there. Which is just great that Romans needed a goddess for this. If you were in the presence of the goddess Concordia, you could not get into a gang fight. Romans needed a goddess for this. This explains so much about Romans. At any rate, we know, however, that this is the shrine not of Concordia, but Venus Cloacina, because it says so here. It says Cloacine, which means of Cloacina, or sorry, of Cloacinus, which means of the sewer. And then up here, it's got the name of the person who minted the coins. It's not important here. And what seems to be on this, you've got a goddess holding a flame of some kind, and then another goddess with her hand on her hip. That's probably Venus. They might both be Venus. One of them might be Eros. There's some debate as to what's going on. And it also seems like the edge of the shrine is built to look a little bit like a boat. Probably because she's the goddess of the sewer. She needs something to float on. So she's on a boat. I love everything about this. This is my favorite shrine in Rome. Don't judge me. Okie dokie. It's a little bit later, and now Rome is becoming something we'd recognize as a proper city. And to do that, two districts start forming. The Forum Romanum, or the Roman Forum, which is the forum you've probably heard of. This is the beating political and market heart of the city of Rome. This has government buildings and shrines that double as government buildings. One of the ways that ancient people would secure government buildings is they would also make them temples. And because you can't steal from a temple, that would act as security. You also can't murder people in temples. This doesn't stop people from murdering people in temples all the time, but a lot of the time it works. The idea that you claim sanctuary in a church, like if you're being chased by an angry mob, you go to the church and you hold onto the altar and you claim sanctuary, and that's a thing. This comes from ancient Mediterranean traditions, including Roman, where you would go into a shrine, and since you're not allowed to murder people in the god's house, you can murder the person. Some rules lawyers on occasion decided that you couldn't kill them, but you could also starve them. This happened to a dude named Pausanias in Sparta, where they just didn't feed him and then he starved to death. And then he haunted that temple forever, which is my plan. If I ever claim sanctuary and people starve me, I am totally going to haunt the shrine. It'll be fun. I'm actually not looking forward to that. That sounds unpleasant. The other forum, because there's more than one, and there are going to be even more fora later, but so the Forum Romanum is the oldest. There's also the Forum Boarium. So the root bo gives us bovine, like bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease. Like cows are bovi. So the Boarium Forum is the meat market. And you have this next to the river because this is the part of the market producing the most poop. So you want to have it river adjacent so that all that poop isn't floating through the religious district and government building sector. You also have it so that food comes as fresh as possible off of the River Tiber, especially fish. The fish market is there too. There's a forum piscatorium, but it's adjacent. We'll just focus on the boarium. So this is an early measure in food safety. I would not recommend eating there. To modern ears, this sounds like a recipe for disaster, but in ancient logic, this is a pretty smart move. In the Forum Bararium, there are temples. The one I find most worthy of mentioning to you is the Temple of Hercules Victor, Hercules Victor, which means Hercules the Conqueror, which sounds like a movie that if somebody hasn't made, it really should be made, and The Rock should be involved again. Best Hercules. Steve Reeves is cool too, but I like The Rock. So this is a temple to Hercules, and it commemorates this one time Hercules paused in the city of Rome during myth times. Apparently, he ran into this man-eating giant with cattle, and I think he killed the man-eating giant and saved the cows, and therefore temple. I'm not going to ask you the details of this myth. That's not quite as important. What is cool about it is that it's one of the best preserved temples from classical antiquity, and it is very, very old. Like the temple of Venus Cloacina, and later we're going to look at the temple of Vesta, it's round. That's unusual. The columns are mostly intact. Now this has all been put back together, so the brick part here at the top, that's modern restoration. I think some of the roof tiles are original, but most of this has been reconstructed too, so it's not that well preserved, but it's pretty darn well preserved. And this is one of the oldest temples in the city of Rome. Yay! And part of why it's round is that Hercules is a hero god. So he was at one point a living mortal, or at least demigod, mortal. He died and then became a god. And people who die and then become a god tend to have round temples in their honor because it looks a lot like Bronze Age tombs. That's the very, very short version of that story. Back to the Forum Romanum. There are a couple more buildings built during this period after the founding in the 8th century. Now we're in the 6th to the 5th century. And these are the big ones on the top of the Capitoline Hill. The ones we're going to focus on are Jupiter Optimus Maximus. We'll mention Juno Mineta in passing, but really Jupiter Optimus Maximus is the big one here. More about that in a minute. Here are the hills of Rome again, in case you forgot where things are. So here's the Capitoline Hill. The Capitoline Hill has two peaks on it. It's a hill kind of shaped like a camel's back, and one of the humps has the temple of Jupiter on it, and the other hump has the temple of Juno. Jupiter and Juno are two married gods. They're the king and queen of the gods. Jupiter is a weather god. Juno is a god of marriage and political alliance. They absolutely hate each other, but they're still married. Go figure. It's mostly Jupiter's fault because he's a horn dog and never takes responsibility for anything. He's not the worst, though. I think Poseidon is the worst. Not Bronze Age Poseidon, though. He seems to be okay. So things built in the Roman Forum during this period. So not on the Capitoline. Now we're back down in the Forum. These are the earliest public buildings. There is a residence called the Regia, which is derived from the word rex for king. We also get regal from it. So this is originally the place where the kings of Rome lived, and later the chief priest of Rome lives in this. And this is why we think that the kings of Rome were a little bit more religious and a little bit less political, but there's a lot of slippage there. Also built during this period is a round, flat, open space where smaller assemblies can meet to vote. So this is not as big as the field of Mars, where the entire Roman male citizen body meets to vote on stuff. This is a little bit smaller for more representative assemblies. This is also where you hang out and listen to people from the Senate speaking to you. Public orators will speak to you too. It's a great place to go if you're bored and you need something to do for an afternoon. So this is, I don't know, Roman Twitter. I guess this is about as close as you're going to get to Roman Twitter before January 6th, at least. Finally, the Curia Hostilia. Curia is the Latin word for the Senate House, and Hostilia refers to one of the early kings of Rome. It tells you so much about Rome that one of their first kings was a dude whose name was literally hostile, which is what it means. It means somebody who's really good at making enemies. He was King Hostile. I love Romans. Yeah, so this was the original Senate House, and by the time we get to the period of the Republic, so the setting of, say, HBO's Rome, so this is like Julius Caesar's Rome, it was in disrepair, and it was so badly beat up that you couldn't meet in it. It had been condemned when it was falling down and eventually gets burned in a funeral pyre. Long story, we don't need to go into the details, but at any rate, this is a really, really old building, and I can't show you it because it was used as the foundation for the next Senate House. So Augustus builds a new one. That's the Curia Julia. It's not there yet. But this tells you a little bit about early Rome's priorities. Already they have a place where a council of elders is meeting, and that tells you something about what a king actually is. So the Roman king isn't just like an absolute monarch with no other constitutional bodies. And the Senate isn't either an island. There's also a place where the people are meeting and voting on things. So even when there are kings, there's still some early experiments in representative democracy going on. And that's interesting, although not unique. This is happening all over the Mediterranean during this period, although Rome's a pretty early adopter of this kind of behavior. The Senate in Rome originally was a council of elders. Elders specifically in this early period from a select group of founding families. This changes and broadens later, and it's an ongoing process through Roman history. Here is where these things are. So the Regia is here, right next to the Temple of Vesta, which is that other circular temple I was telling you about. That's also a very early building. And the Temple of Vesta was the hearth of Rome as a city. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I think that's got its own slide. So here is where the Curia is. So the Senate House is, for the early Forum, like the Forum eventually gets bigger, but in these early days, this is on opposite sides of Forum 1.0. Right next to the Senate House, like you go out of the door and you're immediately in this open pit next to the speaker's platform. So the speaker's platform is not right outside the Senate House. It's on the other side of the Senate House. And that's an interesting move too. So the Senate, I mean, yeah, they have a lot of control over who's on the speaker's platform, but Roman urban planners are putting some distance there because not everybody on that speaker's platform is a senator. And between the speaker's platform and the Senate is a place where the larger population can come together. So that's what the comitium is for. So you have state religion and state politics here and here on either side of the flat land of the business district. And that's a really interesting choice, at least to me. So about the Temple of Vesta and cheap puns. Rome is indeed where the hearth is. Vesta is the goddess of the hearth. So the hearth is the central fire in your ancient house. Before electricity, this is where you cook, this is where you gather, this is where your light is. Even in early fancy houses, there is a place where there's an official hearth fire. The idea of the Temple of Vesta was that this is the fire from which all hearth fires in the city of Rome are born. So when you go to light the fire in your house, you don't just like light it from any old fire. You go to the Temple of Vesta and you pick up a hot coal that you then transport from the Temple of Vesta to your home, and you use that coal to light your fire. So the parent of every fire in Rome is the Temple of Vesta. And it was thought to be so important that this fire be protected that the priestesses of Vesta were given unprecedented freedoms and status within the city. And they are priestesses because Vesta is a virgin goddess. She's one of these goddesses that is exempt from sexual attraction. Aphrodite can't touch her. And as this perpetually single guardian of the hearth, she is all about defending the sanctity of your home. There isn't a lot of mythology about her, which may lend you to believe that she's not an important goddess, but no, she's the goddess that you would have been praying to more frequently often than Jupiter himself, because she lives in your house. So the guardians of the sacred fire of Vesta were the Vestal Virgins. These were women chosen from among the oldest founding families of Rome. She had to be physically perfect, and she'd be chosen at the age of 6. At that point, you would be a Vestal in training. And there were, I think, six Vestals in each age group at any one time. So from the ages of 6 to 16, you're a Vestal Virgin in training. And what we mean by so the responsibilities of a Vestal Virgin, you had to guard this fire. If it ever went out, that was a problem, and allegedly that never happened. But it's not just about guarding the physical fire. You'd also be the guardian of legal documents, and you would be an official witness. And part of the idea of a Vestal Virgin is that, like the goddess that you're part of a cult in, you have to be above seduction of any kind. So your physical virginity, your physical abstaining from sex with men, was meant to be symbolic of a larger impenetrability, right? So the idea was that no man can talk you into bed, no man can talk you into betraying the trust of the state, no anybody can talk you into giving up on your duties, you are never going to tell a lie, you're a witness whose testimony is always believable. Your physical body is a mobile temple to the goddess Vesta too. So to raise your hand against a Vestal Virgin is punishable by death. You cannot touch them, you cannot mess with them, you cannot get in their way. They also get preferred seating at the games, so front row seating at the games. They're one of the few women who are allowed to be in every public space. They get special transportation. They have special garments that they wear, so you know you're looking at a Vestal, and you know, gods help you if you mess with one. There is a price for this, though. If somebody does have sex with a Vestal Virgin in any capacity, and this includes both consensual sex and rape, the punishment for that, for any reason, and this is where it gets super depressing, is being buried alive. I'm not saying that to be sensational, it's going to be a plot point later. Yeah, lots of content warnings when we get into the early mythology of Rome. At 16, you become a fully fledged active Vestal. So from 16 to 26, you are no longer in training, you are actively guarding that flame and doing all of the legal and political stuff a Vestal does. from the age of 26 to 36, you're a veteran Vestal. So now you're in an administrative capacity, you're training the youngest cohort of Vestals. When you turn 36, you can get married, you can have a family, you can have sex, you're done. So one of the interesting things about the construct of virginity and antiquity is that it's not necessarily a forever thing. It's also not something that you lose and never get back. There are rituals in place for taking on a virgin status. Again, not in the cult of Vesta, that's not a thing for Vesta. But Vestal virgins do get a chance to marry and have a family. I mean, they're 36, so not a large family, but you know, you can go off and have a life. And in fact, marrying a former Vestal, gosh, was a huge honor. You had to be either like from a famous family or legit impressive as a Roman dude to get there. But retired Vestals could just continue to live their lives too. Um, yeah, that's everything I'm going to say about this now, but it's kind of cool, except for like the death part. Next up, as promised, the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, which is some overcompensation if I ever heard some. This is the point in the live class where I usually ask Latin students to tell me what these words mean. I'll let you think of some options. Okay. Optimus you may recognize from Optimus Prime, who is the best transformer, at least most people think so. Myself, I kind of like Bumblebee. Optimus in Latin means the best, hence Jupiter the best, and Maximus, I'm sure you can guess. What do you do when you maximize something? You make it as big as possible. So this is Jupiter the best and the biggestest. Romans are many things, many, many things. Subtle is not one of the adjectives I'd reach for right out the bat. This was, at least for a long time, the largest temple in Italy, and for long times after that, one of the largest temples in Italy. I mean, honestly, if you build a temple and call it Optimus Maximus, it better be pretty big. Here's a reconstruction of what it looked like, and it's based on coins like this one showing the facade or the front porch of the temple. And this coin is particularly nice because it shows the 3 front doors, including the main one at the center, which when the doors were open, you could look back and see the statue of Jupiter there. This is a big point in ancient temples. Ancient temples on the inside were the god's house. You don't go to pray to Jupiter on the inside of Jupiter's temple. Even the priests couldn't go there except on the right days and in special circumstances. Sometimes a non-priest could get the special honor of being allowed inside the temple, but for the most part, when you're worshiping Jupiter and sacrificing animals to him, you were doing it on the altar right outside the front steps. So you don't even climb the front steps. The altar is down the front steps in the front. That's where you do the sacrifice, and when you burn parts of the sacrifice on the altar, Jupiter smells the barbecue and is happy. Because everybody loves barbecue. Except for vegans. And vegetarians. But most people who eat meat like barbecue. Because it is delicious. Another thing on the Capitoline Hill that bears some mentioning, actually quickly, there's also the Temple of Juno, as I mentioned. It's called Juno Moneta. The word moneta means money. So this is money Juno, because this is where Romans minted official coinage, and this is where they kept the money before, or the metal rather, before they minted the coins. So it's the treasury, which is partly why it's on the Capitoline. You can't really sneak into the Capitoline, even if you, say, went at night when nobody was around except for some priests. You would still get caught because Juno had a flock of sacred geese, and if you've ever met a goose, you know that they are not kidding. Geese are not here for your nonsense, and they will let everybody in the immediate Rome vicinity know that you are on the Capitoline Hill and you're coming for Juno's money and you need to be nibbled to death. Quack! Yeah, so don't mess with Juno. Other features of the Capitoline Hill that I'll mention briefly, we'll talk about them with Roman triumphs. So is this set of stairs in the side of the hill. It's now paved over, called the Gemonian Stairs. This is where executed people in high crimes against the state were tossed after or while they were dying from their execution. So you toss them down the stairs, and then at the very base of the hill also is the oldest and most official of the prisons in Rome. Now, prison isn't a place where you're sent to be punished for your crimes as such, although kind of sort of. Prisons were used mostly for holding people before trial or for holding them because they had a debt that their family needed to pay, and then their body was collateral, and you had to like pay the debt to get them out of the prison. Prisons weren't places where you sent people to be punished, generally speaking, which is not to say that there weren't things like what we use prisons for now. They were more like labor camps, which is one of the things we do with prisons now, so it's not that different. And on that depressing note, I leave you. Here is your tour of early Rome. Next time, we're going to be talking about the foundation myths of Rome, the stories that you would have been told when you were a little baby Roman trying to figure out what being a grown-up Roman means. Just so you can kind of like brace yourself, especially as you're going into the reading. These are not pleasant stories. There is sibling murder. Victims of rape also end up getting murdered horribly for shitty reasons. I mean, not that there's a not shitty reason for that. It's just shitty. Gosh, what all else happens? There is war. There is institutionalized rape. Several flavors of rape in these myths that we just have to talk about. I am so sorry. Take care of yourself. Do what you need to do. If you absolutely cannot with that topic, reach out to me and we'll come up with an alternative. I am not going to make you go there if you're just not there, especially not in 2021. There's enough suffering in the world. So, like, seriously, I'm not going to do that to you. There will be some stuff on the quiz. We'll come up with a workaround if we need to. However, I'm not going to go into graphic details. I'm certainly not going to sympathize with rapists. That is a no. The stories themselves are not graphic. It's just sad. If it gives you any comfort, though, ancient Romans thought they were problematic and sad and messed up. Which is why I don't feel like I'm picking on the Romans for this. Ancient Romans had a lot of trouble with these stories. And they spent a lot of time kind of struggling with what to do with the sense of identity that these stories give them, which is why it's important to go there, because understanding what Roman identity is difficult if we don't try to unpack some of the stuff that they felt was inextricable from their Romanness. So, on that happy note, I leave you to finish doing your reading for Unit 1. Enjoy, take care, and I will see you in Unit 2. Mwah! Peace.